Follow here. I have a list. The first will be DIAS for the function of organizational communication in sustainability management, a multi-case study. And then you have weather with the strategic problematization of sustainability, reframing dissent in strategic communication. And then a group work, Habermeyer, Blessing and Deep, with the strategic gain loss framing for plastic reduction, with the subtitle Emotions Induced by a Spokesperson as a Representative of an Institution. So if you agree, we can follow this this order. Anna Paula, are you able to share your presentation or?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Just let me know, you are from which university or institution?
University of São Paulo.
Nice, very nice. Thank you very much. And so I leave you the floor. As you know, it will be 20 minutes for the presentations, and then more or less 10 minutes for the discussion. That will be the timing. Thank you very much. I leave you the floor.
Thank you. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to my friends from Brazil. Thank you very much for your virtual presence. It is a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to share my research to you and share the floor with such qualified professionals. It is certainly be an excellent opportunity to exchange knowledge. My name is Ana Paula Dias. I'm a bachelor in public relations from University of São Paulo, and I'm a graduate student in digital transformation at ESPM. I also have experience in the private and the third sector as a communication and marketing analyst. Currently, I'm a member of the Global Alliance for Partnership on Media and Information Literacy, UNESCO, and also a researcher in the Thought Career group, where I study smart cities and new cities from the perspective of media information literacy. Today, I will talk about the function of organizational communication and sustainability management, a multi-case study. So we are all facing the risks of climate change around the world. In Brazil, for example, between 2019 and 2020, there was a considerable increase in incidents involving environmental disasters, especially with regard to fires and CO2 emissions. Pantanal biome surpassed the mark of 60,000 fires in 2020, the highest number of fires since 1998. The fires in Brazil grew by 82% compared to 2018, with more than 71,000 outbreaks, the highest number registered in the last 7 years by the National Institute for Space and Space Research. In our world panorama, according to the Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations, up to 40% of the world population will suffer from a lack of water, and by 2050, that number will rise to 2/3. So it is a situation that affects all countries and all economies. So how to communicate about the environmental crisis? These are the topics that we will discuss today. How to talk about environmental, the function of organizational communication and sustainability management, a brief history of integrating the concept of sustainability into organizational communication, how to communicate about environmental sustainability, the methodology, the results, conclusion, and references. The debate on sustainable development must involve the various social actors, from state institutions to private companies and the third sector. For this reason, the need to strengthen the dialogue between the corporate world and the social world is increasingly urgent. The present work is concerned with the understanding how the organizational communication process has been characterized in the face of the sustainability paradigm. And the main objective is to bring reflection about the communication process of business organizations, in the face of new sustainability paradigm and the need to communicate their initiatives to their stakeholders. It is also a specific objective to demonstrate some gaps on regulation and other problems that make communication and engagement on environmental issues a big challenge in Brazil. 3 financial institutions were adopted as a research corpus. Number 1 is Bank of Brazil, mixed economy institutions and the first bank to operate in the country, founded in 1808 by Dom João. The second one is Itaú Unibanco, a Brazilian bank that was born from the merger of 2 large banks, and Santander Bank, a Spanish bank that has a network in Brazil. The conclusions of this study include some suggestions of solutions to these problems throughout the insights about the Habermas communication theory. Before we talk about the result and the methodology, I would like to talk a brief history of integrating the concept of sustainability into organizational communication in Brazil. The theme is not new. In Brazil, the concept of social responsibility was widely disseminated in the business world with the creation of Ethos Institute in 1968. In 1990, we have Equator Principles, 1992 United Nations Conference in Rio de Janeiro, and 2004 Corporate Sustainability Index by Bovespa. And however, according to Oded Grajo, its founder of Ethos Institute, in an interview in Organical magazine, there should also be pressure on the public power to approve smart rules that preserve the environment. The transition from the philanthropic scenario to the concept of social responsibility as a business strategy stems, among other factors, from the expansion of the third sector in Brazil, according to Sartori in 2006. In the author's conception, only with the creation of the Corporate Sustainability Index by Bovespa in 2004, began to conceive the concept of sustainability in the business environment. Since then, the concept of sustainability has been inserted in the institutional discourse as means of legitimizing the business. And sustainability has also assumed the role of one of the catalyst elements of communication for the construction and maintenance of the image and the reputation of organizations. For financial institutions, the concern with sustainable development gained greater prominence in 1990 with the launch of Equator Principles. The Equator Principles are the result of a meeting promoted in 2002 by the International Finance Corporation, the financial arm of the World Bank. The objective of the pact is to guarantee sustainability, environmental balance, social impact, and the prevention of the road accidents that may cause embarrassment in the course of the project, and also reducing the risks of default. Those companies interested in obtaining resources in the international financial market must incorporate in their project finance evaluation structures the conditions determined. So, how to communicate about environmental sustainability? Cardoso in 2006 warns that the constant transformations that took place in social, political, and economic fields, in addition to the significant advance of information technologies, have challenged the fundamentals of business communication. For the author, it can no longer be accepted that the communication process, with its harmonized, verticalized models, and with an emphasis on the instrumentality of communication, is the most pertinent way to respond to the challenge of the strategy management of organizations in times of globalization. And according to Leff in 2001, the different perceptions of the environmental problem about the causes of the resource crisis, development inequalities, the social distribution of ecological costs, generate different theoretical and practical knowledge demands. In the author's perspective, the lack of scientific knowledge in civil society can cause difficulty in mobilizing for the cause. According to Baldissera in 2009, it is believed that society and its organizations are far from understanding the meaning contemplated by the notion of sustainability. In the author's views, there is a tension between culture, sustainability, and communication. And making a relation with Habermas' theory, communication action, which speaks of the concept of action oriented toward mutual understanding, there is a need to explain the perspective on the role and the interaction mode of the interlocutors. According to Habermas, social interactions are more or less cooperative and stable, more or less conflicting or unstable. There is therefore an orientation toward mutual understanding versus an orientation toward success. In this perspective, speech and communicative action are elements of construction and transformation of the social world. In the theory of communicative action, speech acts are not only used to represent events or states, they serve to produce interpersonal relationships. The way in which this communication is oriented has a direct influence on the social world. Taking organizations as actors on the social world in which they operate, the perspective of communicative actions for sustainability makes sense in a way that through communication, they will influence the way in which individuals, including the organization itself, interact with the social world. Habermas, in 1989, says that the concept of communicative action is formulated in such a way that the acts of mutual understanding link the action plans of the different participants and bring together actions directed towards objectives in an interactive connection. Furthermore, communicative action can be understood as a circular process in which the author is both at the same time. He is the initiator who dominates situations through imputable actions, and at the same time, it is also the product of the traditions in which it finds itself, the solidarity group to which it belongs, and the socialization process in which it is created. In other words, the organization affects and it is affected by the environment through its communicative actions. For the action to be taken as legitimated and the action to be really communicative, that is oriented toward mutual understanding, Habermas postulates that, number one, that the formulated statement is true. Number two, that the speech act is correct in relation to an existing normative context. And number three, that the speaker's manifest intention is aimed at is spoken. Communication will be effective if somehow it manages to create meaning for the interlocutor or build a connection based on the sharing on science. It is important to think about how sustainability has been signified by communication, especially in organizational communication. That is the field of interest of this work. So based on the analysis of the banks studied, it is intended to verify how sustainability communication has been carried out. The methodology, research methodology adopted was the theoretical practical model of an essentially qualitative character and a first exploratory comparative analysis based on the multi-case methodology of Robert Wien, with the support of pre-established criteria and the bibliography review. The investigation concluded a documentary research based on the sustainability reports issued by the analyzed banking institutions content analysis, and documentary research. About the results, as we said, the three institutions are Bank of Brazil, Itaú Unibanco, and Santander Bank. Here, as the objective of the research is to analyze how sustainability communication has been carried out for the institutions, the organization's identity will be preserved when we talk about the results. So looking at the institutional website of the first organization, it was possible to perceive the institution's ethical guidelines, especially in relation to environmental protection. Rules were adopted inspired by the inclusion of social environmental criteria for hiring and suppliers, and the creation of an internal regulation with rules to strengthen the culture of sustainability. This shows an important engagement of internal team in the issues. The second institution analyzed shows that its management considers social environmental factors to be one of the most important topics for business, as it may affect the creation of shared value in the short, medium, and long terms from the point of view of the organization and its many stakeholders. The institution's sustainability strategy was defined based on analysis of the vision, corporate policies, voluntary commitments and pacts, research, and meetings with stakeholders to understand material issues. Communication is seen as an essential tool for the business, both for the satisfaction of customers and to increase the company's financial results and reputation. They also developed a guide for issuing green bonds in the national market. The guide aims to guide participants and those interested in fixed income securities market in Brazil regarding the process of issuing green bonds. And the third institutions base its sustainability action and strategy on three axes: social inclusion, education, social and environmental business and management. In general, organizational communication is carried out intensively. The most popular type of information is financial information, followed by press releases. The least usual type of communication is the newsletter, so different interactivity with interest parties is required. The presentation of information is still done in a very traditional way, without exploring the many possibilities associated with creativity that the internet offers. And communication is carried out using predominantly text with an absence of multimedia or interactive content. Even the additional information on sustainability, such as financial reports, sustainability reports, newsletters, conferences, awards, and press releases, there is a majority of references to financial information associated with sustainability. Sustainability information often is transmitted through annual public sector financial reports. And in general, banking institutions encourage participants to contribute with suggestions and criticisms, many of them causing changes in the established business routines, modifying products and services offered, etc. On the other hand, it was noticed that the three institutions studied make use of organizational communication mainly as an instrument of accountability to society through the annual reports and information available on the website of the respective institutions. In the social media, little is said about these guidelines adopted, hence the impact on yet another component of the communication process, the media. The three organizations studied use digital communication for environmental sustainability with a certain emphasis on institution information. The reports are made available in electronic format. This website have opinions, options, for interactivity, content segmentation, and specific stakeholders. To conclude, national legislation and commitments assumed in the agreement and pact signed by financial institutions are the main factor that ensure the banks cover companies with the inclusion of sustainable actions in business planning. Facing audiences with different characteristics and demands that companies had to work on their message with more assertiveness and precision. To talk, for example, about environmental preservation with environmentalists and NGO working in the sector, one cannot deal with the subject in a superficial or non-specialized way. So new skills had to be acquired so that the message had adequate depth and formatting. New information technologies, especially the adoption of the web, also had a significant impact on the configuration of companies' communication with their audience. It was observed that essential characteristics of the web, such as agility and interactivity, not only represent factors for improvement in the communication process of organizations with their audience, but also meet the demands of social environmental responsibility, since then facilitate access to different audience and open space for their participation. Another relevant aspect identified through the research refers to the close link between management and communication, as well as between communication and engagement. Any marketing action or effort to enhance the brand based on social environmental actions and not based on the organization practice can have very serious consequences, such as a loss of credibility and irreparable damage to reputation. The survey also showed that in the search for sustainability, all stakeholders need to be involved. They need to lead their stakeholders to commitment and carry out together the mission of developing in a sustainable way. In this way, the role of organizational communication is not limited to exchanging information and promoting dialogue between the parties involved, but also involve changing habits, creating awareness, and adopting new values, whether with employees, customers, and other stakeholders. The research allowed some findings that point to significant change in organizational communication reflected in the companies of communication process. And it was also possible to ascertain that the inclusion of sustainability on the agenda of business organization was the motivation of many of these transformations. Through the study, it was also possible to realize the importance of mapping all variables in planning for business sustainability. And another point, the discourse currently practiced by companies, the state, and regulators demonstrate a passive posture of accountability to society instead of an active voice, encouraging behavior change, etc. It is necessary so to reflect on the means and forms of communication of these organizations and to interact with society so that they start to awaken citizens in general to social action. Mainly communication for sustainability is vital to democracy. It is based on the defense of bio and social diversity, which is manifested in creation of a planetary culture that identifies with the equitable distribution of natural resources with a global governance that respect the identity and autonomy of nations and cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just we can have a little bit of a discussion on your presentation. So perhaps I can start by asking if in your research you were you were also analyzing, for example, supports, and if you have what do you think about the application of the principle of Habermas to the communication of the three institutions? So sorry if you already presented that, but perhaps I lost some part. But anyway, I wanted to know if you are able to say if these three institutions in their, for example, online communication, if they respect the principle of Habermas concerning their communication on CSR, on responsibility. I hope my question is clear for you.
Thank you. Well, the research, the data are from 2018. So some aspect of communication change since then. Of the environmental communication in Brazil is more ability to society, and I think more traditional, and not to engagement society and the stakeholders on this issue. It's on social media, for example, we don't see communication, environmental communication, so too much materials about it. So we have a lack, including we have to training.
Sorry, I must say that
professionals.
Sorry, the communications is not clear, so perhaps there is a problem with the connection. Perhaps it could be an idea to stop your video. Often this is a yes.
Okay.
Let's try that just with the sound. So let's yeah, you can speak
you hear
now.
Me?
Let's have a look.
Okay. Can you hear me right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So we in business communicators have to be training. We have invest in training of these professionals, because in general we don't have many knowledge about environmental issues, specific knowledge about it. So I think Habermas' theory can help us to understand how engage in the engagement about the issue, but it's not working yet in the organizations here.
Okay, so basically in your research you didn't apply this model. You just describe what is happening with what is important to do in this field, etc. So perhaps you will, if this research will continue, will apply the criteria by Habermas to your material, isn't it? Am I correct?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
And I suggest also to get in touch with the huge literature on CSR communication in the 20 last years. In the last 20 years, there has been a lot of writings on how, on case studies on how institutions and also financial institutions communicate concerning CSR, so corporate social responsibility and environmental responsibility. So I think it will be very interesting for you. There is also a journal on bank communication, for example, that can be a source of information to continue your research. And it will be very interesting to have more information on how these three institutions are communicating and are using communication to improve their CSR politics. This is the financial sector is really very interesting for that. So I don't know if there are other questions or comments or suggestions also for this research that is developing. Okay, well, I think if you agree that we can pass to the second presentation from a group of researchers. And Tanya is there, so I suppose that it's you who are going to present. Perhaps you will pass the word to one another, and that will be nice. Thank you very much. You can share of course, your screen.
Yes, I will start to share my screen.
Thank you.
And I'll start the presentation. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. My name is Tanya. I research at Augsburg University, and the specific focus of my research is media effects and media reception, with a specific focus on environmental communication. And today I am here to present with my colleague Janine. Janine, can you start your audio?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Janine. I'm also a research fellow and PhD student in the field of media reception and media effects at the University of Augsburg. Me and my colleague Tanya, we are very pleased to present our work today in a virtual form. So despite the current situation, we hope everyone is fine. So today we want to talk with you about the topic strategic gain-loss framing for plastic reduction, emotions induced by a spokesperson as a representative of an institution. So today we want to talk with you about environmental communication. I would like to start with the theoretical background to give you some general information. Annually, 400 million tons of non-decomposable plastic are produced. This leads to the death of millions of animals, especially sea animals, and various human health consequences. So in general, we can say that reducing plastic consumption is a really relevant topic. Especially NGOs have the goal to mobilize people for a better world. So in an environmental context, to reduce plastic pollution. And the question arises, how can they talk about the plastic pollution in order to motivate people to reduce it? First of all, let's take a deeper look into NGOs. NGOs are non-profit organizations that operate independently of any government. And they are organized on community and national or international levels to serve a social or political goal, such as humanitarian causes or the environment. Tanya, I think you're too fast. You have to go back.
Sorry.
No, don't worry. But I think it's easier.
Start to share my slides again. One moment. Okay, sorry.
I know, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. So again, back to the NGOs, and they have the purpose to mobilize people in a silent fight, like, for example, climate change or like human rights, for example. And in our case, regarding plastic pollution, we also want to focus on NGOs with environmental aims. So how should professional NGOs talk about environmental topics such as plastic reduction? The main representatives of NGOs in the media are their spokespeople. This is why we would like to focus on them. They work as communication professionals, and we want to analyze their role in the communication process and to what extent people see them with high esteem, maybe similarly to environmental heroes, when they communicate directly to recipients. So our aim is to analyze effective communication mechanisms and facets of the desire for mobilization against climate change. And we want to examine the effectiveness of possible communication mechanisms for a spokesperson speaking as a representative of an institution.
So to analyze how spokespeople of institutions might be able to activate recipients towards an environmentally friendly behavior change, we analyze how information is presented in media content. One communication strategy proven to be effective in other communication contexts is the framing of information. So what does framing of media content mean? The communicator creates communication material in a way that specific information or positions are highlighted so that the content is processed by recipients with the specific focus on the highlighted information. The most popular framing strategy in communication research is gain-loss framing. According to this strategy, there are two types of framing the outcome of a behavior: putting the focus on either the possible gains of the behavior or the possible losses. So gain framing takes into focus the positive outcomes of a behavior. So it is shown what could be gained from changing one's behavior, and loss framing shows the negative outcomes of a behavior. So it shows how the consequences look like in a negative way if the behavior is continued in the way as it has been before. So how does gain-loss framing affect recipients? To have the negative or the positive outcomes of one's own behavior presented can then result in an emotional reactions in recipients, which can start a need for action in them. So the need to either achieve the positive outcomes or to avoid the negative outcomes. The emotional reactions from gain or loss framing are then induced as in the following. As shown by Bilancic and colleagues, loss frames can result in higher fear and guilt, and through these emotions can activate willingness to sacrifice. And gain frames, so the positive outcomes being shown, can result in the emotion hope, which then activates willingness to sacrifice. And willingness to sacrifice means that the people reading these communication materials are ready to take specific costs in their own life into consideration to start a new behavior for the overall profit that could be achieved. So either the positive outcome or to avoid the negative outcome. And how can the willingness to sacrifice be translated into actual behavioral intentions and behavior change? Research has also shown that communicating for behavior change, as gain-loss frame is doing, can also result in negative reactions in recipients like reactants, which means that recipients experience negative defensive reactions towards the communication material and are not convinced by it. So for an effective communication design that shows recipients the outcomes of their behavior without leading to these negative defensive reactions, research on fear appeals shows how communication materials might positively lead these emotional reactions into an actual behavior change. So the research shows that presenting a negative outcome of a behavior can trigger fear, and communicating it with resolving actions or non-actions can activate behavior change. So for an effective communication, presenting the outcome of a behavior should be accompanied with behavioral suggestions, so recipients can directly translate their emotional reactions into behavioral intentions. And as shown within research on fear appeals, these induced emotions should be combined with proposing a behavior. And gain-loss framing aims to induce emotions and to translate these emotional reactions into behavioral intentions. So the best effects of a communication strategy by a spokesperson are expected when gain-loss framing is combined with proposing a behavior. And these proposed behaviors could then avoid these negative reactions, as in fear appeals research, and be effective to activate behavior change. And instead, combining the presentation of outcomes with factual reasoning instead of these behavioral suggestions could not help with translating emotions into behavior change and might eventually lead to these negative reactions. So for an effective communication of a spokesperson, communicating for an institution, framing, presenting the consequences of one's action in a personalized way, combined with behavioral suggestions, might be the most effective communication strategy to activate recipients. So to test this assumption in an experimental setting, our study tests the communication presented by a spokesperson of an institution with communicating with either gain framing or loss framing, and combining it with either follow-up information that is either behavioral suggestions or factual reasoning. So the communication material starts with either a gain frame or a loss frame, so showing the positive or the negative outcomes of a behavior, and then follow-up information with either behavioral suggestions or factual reasoning. And to test the effectiveness of these communication strategies, the following constructs for the development of a behavior are relevant for us. According to the theory of reasoned action, to develop an environmental behavior, the attitudes are relevant of a recipient that influence the behavioral intentions and then ultimately influence behavior. So we test the effects of our communication materials on attitude, behavioral intentions, and behavior to analyze how our communication might influence the development of a behavior. And our study focuses on the following research question. How does a spokesperson communicating with gain or loss framing and as follow-up information, factual reasoning, or behavioral suggestions influence recipients' attitudes, behavioral intentions, and their actual behavior?
So in the following our method, we conducted an online experiment with a 2, so as Tanya said, gain versus loss frame, and 2, follow-up information, either factual reasoning or behavioral suggestions between group design. This means that participants read a website excerpt of an NGO, so either the one with gain frame and the follow-up information, for example, with factual reasoning, or the one with loss frame and factual reasoning, or gain frame and behavioral suggestions, or loss frame and behavioral suggestions. They read this excerpt of an NGO with the spokesperson communicating, and after that they answered a questionnaire. After 2 weeks, they answered a second questionnaire on the conducted behavior. All in all, we had 220 participants, 126 of them being female, and they were between the ages of 18 and 84. Now you can see the website excerpt of an NGO. It's in German, so maybe it might be a little bit difficult to understand. But here you can see the loss framing in the quote of a spokesperson. So we focused on negative consequences if the behavior is not changed. Then here you can see the gain frame in the quote of a spokesperson. So this would be the positive consequences if they change their behavior. So if they reduce plastic consumption. And then the second part, either the behavioral suggestions or the factual reasoning. So now, how did the communication work? Was it effective or not? So let's continue with the results. We conducted two-way analyses of variance, controlling for interest, pre-knowledge, and gender. And we found no effects on the dependent variable attitude. So attitude was not affected at all, but we found some effects for the dependent variable behavioral intentions. There was a main effect of framing. So loss frames resulted in higher behavioral intentions than gain frames. So the people who read the negative consequences, they had more behavioral intentions. Moreover, we found no main effect of follow-up information and no interaction effect. So we conducted another two-way analysis of variance, also controlling for interest, pre-knowledge, and gender. And there we found for the dependent variable behavior, no main effects for framing or follow-up information, but a significant disordinal interaction effect. You can see it in figure 1 here.
To test which constructs might be relevant in the process of influencing behavior, we conducted mediation analyses. And we found that loss framing influenced behavioral intentions via fear, and loss framing also influenced behavior via fear. So the emotion fear showed as relevant in our study for how framing influences behavioral intentions and behavior. And furthermore, the emotion guilt showed as relevant for how framing influences behavioral intentions. And for positive emotions, the emotion hope was relevant for how gain framing influences behavioral intentions. So let's discuss our results. So our overall results, we found first of all loss frames communicated by an NGO spokesperson to be effective via fear for behavioral intentions as well as for behavior. However, unlike in research on fear appeals, recipients receiving loss framing via a spokesperson did not need these behavioral suggestions to translate their induced emotions into behavioral intentions. So a spokesperson communicating negative consequences personally apparently sufficiently mobilizes recipients towards a behavior change. So the role of fear induced in this very personal communication by a spokesperson is apparently sufficient for activating towards a need for action, and the subsequent type of follow-up information, as in behavioral suggestions in other research, seems to then be irrelevant for an effective communication.
Moreover, we found that positive framing was successful via hope for behavioral intentions, and combined with facts, a direct effect on behavior can be found. So to be convinced towards the necessity of a behavior change, positive emotions possibly are not as effective as negative emotions. And an effect of positive framing alone could only be achieved for behavioral intentions, but not for the actual behavior. So for inducing actual behavior, there is the necessity to convince recipients additionally via factual reasoning in the follow-up information. So at the end, our final conclusion: how should NGOs talk about the environment? Our research question was, how does a spokesperson communicating with gain versus loss framing and factual reasoning versus behavioral suggestions influence recipients' attitudes, behavioral intentions, and their actual behavior? So to communicate effectively in a silent fight, like the fight against climate change, communication with a quote from a spokesperson can be effective for mobilizing recipients to fight against environmental issues, such as plastic reduction. Our study shows effective communication mechanisms in this context to influence behavior change. Loss framing, so showing the negative consequences on its own, is effective via the emotion fear. And gain framing, showing the positive consequences if the behavior is if they do the behavior, is effective in combination with factual reasoning.
So possibly recipients see professionals from an NGO with so much esteem that these professionals are perceived as environmental heroes in the war of combating climate change. So having information presented in a personalized way by being communicated via a spokesperson aiming to activate one's emotion might automatically positively influence behavior change. Follow-up studies should analyze the role of perceived esteem of professionals and its influence on the effectiveness of environmental communication, especially when inducing negative emotions. So now we have come to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Here you can see the relevant references for our presentation, and we are looking forward to your ideas and feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation, very clear and on a subject that is really interesting. And so let's discuss a little bit about this this presentation. And I don't know if there are questions, so don't hesitate. As for me, just to open the discussion, I had the questions just to better understand, of course, your project. So when you talk about factual reasoning as an add-up, as an addition, so you said that people receive the document, the text, and then there is another document with the factual reasoning. What is it, factual reasoning? Of course, you can. Perhaps we don't have time to get in all the details, but we will read it in the paper. But anyway, what is it, just to have an idea of what is factual reasoning in this case? And also, I can make the same question for the other, the behavioral suggestions, just to have some examples. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So the focus of our material was to create a website excerpt of an NGO. And in the website excerpt starts with the quote communicated via the spokesperson that either puts the focus on the positive emotions, so the gain framing of this behavior, or the negative consequences, so the loss framing of this behavior. And then the website continues with either the factual reasoning or behavioral suggestions how the behavior should be changed in the future. So factual reasoning is based on specific numbers and facts that try to convince people just via different arguments. So the argumentation is trying to convince the people to change their behavior, and the behavioral suggestions are then focusing instead on the behavioral components, so which behaviors should be conducted instead to actually achieve these positive or negative outcomes.
so the first text is already on a behavior that has to be changed.
So the first part focuses on the consequences of the behavior if it is either continued like this or changed, and then it shows positive or negative outcomes, and then the follow-up information after this gain or loss framing is either focusing on a factual depiction and tries to convince people through numbers to change their behavior, or is suggesting specific behaviors.
Also, so specific ways of changing the behavior, so practical.
Exactly. Yes.
So the first part is more or less, so we need to reduce plastic consumption. If we do that, and then we have the positive consequences, or it is we need to reduce plastic consumption, but if you don't do that, the negative consequences.
The negative, the loss.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And then the behavioral suggestions would continue with 10 suggestions how the behavior could be changed in everyday life.
I see.
Yeah, for example, please buy products without plastic, or please don't, when you go shopping, bring your own bag, whatever. Yeah.
And the NGO is not an existing one.
No,
exactly. So we invented an NGO so that how much people know NGOs before does not affect how they perceive this information.
Exactly, because there is the effect of the mark of the reputation capital of the.
Yes, exactly.
It's nice. I see. It's very interesting because sometimes we read that. The fear argument has to be avoided. So yesterday, Thierry Libaert said that globally it's better to have positive, if I remember well, positive arguments and positive frames anyway. So in your case, you can see that the situation can be different, and that fear appeal, yes, loss appeal with loss frame, or with the development of fear as an emotion, I suppose, in the as the respondent said, can be useful, can be a useful emotion to have an effect on behavior. So this is an interesting result.
Exactly. So the negative consequences and these negative emotions then activate a need for action, that something has to be changed in the behavior.
And perhaps it's linked to the type of issue, because this is a plastic pollution. So plastic is something material. Perhaps in the case, for example, of climate change, it is something less concrete, perhaps less linked to the behaviors, the practical behaviors of people, and it will be difficult to have this. Perhaps the results would be different anyway. And also, I was thinking, but I suppose that in your case, you worked only on the textual document, so without working on images, on the visual.
Yes, exactly. So our study focuses on how the website is constructed in the textual form. Yes.
Yeah, textual, because the visual was the same, I saw, and so it would be interesting to have a look at how image can influence the emotional aspect of this kind of communication, because of course image is very effective in this case, and it could be another kind of study later.
Especially if these consequences are depicted, these consequences could be very well shown in a visual form.
Yeah. And I had another question on which behaviors you were focusing on, but I suppose that is plastic consumption, and so it's you have already answered. Perhaps is there? Yeah, Joanna, you can ask your questions, or if you want, or we can just read inside the conversation. There is a question for you. In order to be effective to change environmental behaving, do those NGOs are taking into consideration the idea about two kinds of environmentalism, particularly developed by Ramachandra Gua? Wow, environmentalism of the poor and environmentalism of the rich.
So our study did not take this specific theory into our design, but it would very well be interesting to also include the environmentalism of the poor and the rich into future NGO communication.
In Germany, the situation in general is, I don't want to say different, but people are very environmental friendly. So it is quite difficult to motivate them to be even more environmental friendly. So this is something we always talk about. How can we do that? How can we motivate people? Because in German supermarkets, it's not, normally no one would buy a plastic bag.
Okay.
So this is something that's not usual in Germany. So we need to go a little bit further. The best thing would be to go in a supermarket where there is no plastic at all. So yeah, this is definitely something really interesting, and it would also be a great idea to focus on that.
Yeah. Personally, I don't know this distinction. So environmentalism of the poor, environmentalism of the rich. So it would be difficult for me to see what is the difference. Anyway, I can have some ideas, but of course I should read this kind of critical approaches in order to see. Yeah. Anyway, it can be interesting to have also this kind of opening. I don't know if Johan is satisfied with the...
Yeah, sorry, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I was wondering about it because in my research it's quite important to take it in consideration, but I'm working in India, so the environmental matter is quite different there.
Yeah.
So
I really think there are really big cultural differences, and also here we are talking about specific behaviors concerning plastic consumption in a Western, very rich country.
yeah.
Germany, so it's perhaps it's d'office, as they would say in French, is of course environmentalism of the rich, because I would say, but I don't know the model, the distinction. So
no, the model is quite. Is to make a synthesis is like quite different to ask people depending on their social condition to be to have eco-friendly behaviors when you are rich, poor, or middle class people. And for example, in India, many people, if you say to them when you are buying something, please don't use plastic, it's not their priorities. Their priorities for most of them is to buy something.
Buy something.
Yeah. To survive. Yeah.
Yeah. So the context is very, very important too. Yeah. And it can be interesting to develop. Yeah, of course, a reflection on the context of the research in general. So it can be interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a part of the reflexivity, what is called the reflexivity on research. So what is the task and what is the context? Yes.
Context,
what are the basis of the effort? Okay. We will be back here for the third round table with different professionals who are working in the field of responsible communication. So, see you later at 3:15.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.